And that tells me that it's more probably about politics than the actual letter of the law. And I think that will help the situation if a mom has another alternative to raising it herself. To have a two-state solution, you have to have two sides that want that solution. You could start oil exploration to see what is there. That would be an issue that he would be addressing as president. Is there another shoe to drop, something we don't know about? And if not, then why is he gone?
He boasts about wages going up, but Rod, in terms of working families who are watching this right now, just folks, police, firefighters, teachers, people who work and live around here, they're finding it harder to get by, not easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of reasons, which we'll go into in depth here to some degree. I mean, I have a son-in-law who's a Manatee County deputy, and I understand that there has been a real stagnation, particularly in the purchasing power of middle-income wages. But I think there's a number of reasons for that, not least of which is government regulation in the broad scale. Most recently, Obamacare, alluding to Kate's package. That's a real big reason why a lot of employers, I know a lot of personal situations, keep people part-time is to avoid the Obamacare things. When you have required benefits, you have less money left for wages. That just makes a whole lot of sense. And then I'd like us to get into at some point too the immigration issue, where you have the low-end, unskilled, uneducated laborers coming in, taking those jobs. That's clearly going to keep wages down at the low end too. Right. And there's that's historically true. I would also point out, however, that when you talk about a divergence starting in the 70s, you have to look at a divergence from what? And so from the 50s through the 60s, you had the U.S. Stood alone, a behemoth astride the world economically, because every other Western competitor was decimated by World War II. So our economy was fantastic and strong, and hopefully we'll never have that situation again in the world where there will be that, that kind of dominance by one because all the others are destroyed by war. So that is what led up. By the 70s now, you're seeing Japan resurgent, Germany, France, England resurgent. You're seeing a lot more competitors. That was going to naturally change the dynamic that was going on, which is why it makes sense that it would start happening in the 70s, which was not a conservative decade, and it would start happening rather than starting, say, in the mid-80s when, say, Reaganomics started kicking in.
So you all agree on that, there's a disconnect between how a worker feels they're treated and how they are actually treated.
I think the weakening of the labor.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the factors.
Yeah, and that could be one thing that, generally speaking, workers might become disillusioned and come to expect lower wages. That then becomes the new norm.
Well, but I think that part of what drives a wage income gap is the top and the bottom. And at the bottom, it has clearly and obviously been impacted by the level of immigration that we've had coming into the country, largely illegal immigration, that has allowed for uneducated, unskilled people to come in by the millions and millions and millions that largely don't speak the language. They're obviously taking the lowest end jobs, and they're depressing wages down there because they'll accept ridiculously low wages because it's still good compared to where they came from. So that knocks it down. A Harvard economist named George Borjas, who's considered a standout expert on economics of immigration, estimates that for every 10% increase in a group, whether it's a professional group or a wage group or whatever, a 10% increase by immigration will decrease wages within that group by 3 to 4%. So I think that this explains a lot of the bottom end stagnation. And the same thing holds true, however, for the top end. Borjas suggests that at the top end, if we flipped our immigration policy and allowed in all of the doctors and engineers and MBAs that wanted to come in and capped it at the bottom, you would actually see more stagnation at the top and you'd see wage growth at the bottom.
And the free market fairy and the magic dust. I think that markets are wonderful when the incentive structure is appropriate, and it's government's job to create those incentives, create those conditions. And if you create this boogeyman and pull government away, then you're going to get these perverse outcomes. And I think a broad range of policies and regulatory policies, we're going to disagree on that. Again, I understand government can be bad sometimes, but I don't believe in the free market fairy.
Right.
Yeah, the free market fairy, which Adam Smith called The Invisible Hand, and it's a book that still endures centuries and centuries later.
Under certain conditions.
Clearly, there's a role for government in free market capitalistic economics. One role is making sure there aren't monopolies. One role is a certain protection of rights and properties and liberties. You need to have government play a role in free markets. You absolutely have to. We disagree dramatically on how much of a role that should be. I would suggest that the more role it plays beyond those basic ones of monopolies and private property rights and that sort of thing, the more role it plays, the more it screws up the market. The more it screws up the market, the more you have all of these things that get out of whack and out of balance.
And Rod, you know, you always hear, you know, we all had to deal with the great financial collapse in 2008. A lot of people at the top end of our economy have recovered from it, but a lot of people, a lot of folks, you know, who, you know, had their money in 401ks and so forth and local investments, they still have not recovered. And how do they find their way out?
Well, I mean, I think that the method for finding your way out is the same as it's always been in this country. You know, you work hard and you're responsible and whatnot and you save. However, in my experience, most all of those people have recovered by now. Even if they defaulted on their homes, you know, they're up to the 7 years and they're back in the market again. If they lost a ton of money in the stock market, well, they gained it back in spades unless they panicked and took it out, which is why I agreed that we need to. People like us really don't need to pay a ton of attention, I think, to the stock market. Now, I know financial advisors are screaming it right at me right now, but really don't need to. You know, that should be long-term for us. We don't have large amounts of money to invest, and I think that we need to be paying attention more to policy in Washington than the stock market.